everyone, I'm Coral. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here today with the books that I ended up reading in August. I've got a fair amount of vintage horror here because of Garbogust, which was hosted by Ollie from Criminali. I will leave a link to his channel. Obviously the readathon is over at this point, but it was such a blast, and Ollie's channel he's just really funny. He's always reading the strangest things. So yeah, check his channel out, and also check my channel out right now as I tell you what I read this month. As far as my stats go for this month, I read 10 books. 5 of them were books that I owned previous to this year, so I count those as like books off my TBR. I also had 2 arcs and 1 book that was from the Libro FM ALC program. In total, I read 3,445 pages, which is about 111 pages per day. I have a goal of reading 4,000 pages this year, and last month my end total was 8,045 pages to go. So after this month, I only have 4,600 pages left to read until I reach my goal, which is manageable. If I tried really hard, I could do that. I could bust that out in a month, but that's a lot of pages. As far as the genres I read this month, 6 of them were horror, 1 was a memoir, 1 was a sci-fi book, and 2 of them were more Southern Gothic-y, but you know, I guess you could also count them as horror. I just like to be really specific for no reason. The years these books were published: the oldest book I read this month was published in 1971. I also read a book from 1977, 1 published in 1988, 1 published in 1999. Then we jump all the way to 2011. I also read a book from 2019, a book from 2020, and then 3 new releases, so those came out in 2022. I'm also trying to be more cognizant of the series that I read, so I don't just like start a series and forget about it. But I think that's exactly what I'm gonna do this month, because I did start a new series that I liked, but it's like, when will I get to the other one? I don't know. So I started one series, and then one I continued on with, but it's also a reread, so like, if I, you know, don't finish the series, I'm not going to be upset about it. I'm not going to be upset at myself about it, you know what I mean? My brain. There's just no reason for any of this, but here it is. As far as the intended audience goes, 11 of the books that I read this month were adult. I read 2 ebooks, 2 audiobooks, and 6 physical books, and all 10 of them were novel length. So there we go. All right, now let's get into what I actually read. So the first book I'd like to talk to you about, I'm only going to talk about very briefly. There will be a couple books in this wrap up that will be like that, mostly to save time, and so I'm just not rehashing the same things over and over again because I've done a whole separate review about this. So if you're interested, I definitely encourage you to go watch that. But this is for Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes by LaRocca. He was so kind to send me an arc of this, and this one comes out September 6th. This is, of course, a new release, so it was published this year, or is going to be published this year, and this is from Titan Books. So this contains the titular novella, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which is currently out of print, so this is a great way, if you missed out on the craze, this is a great way for you to be able to pick that up. And it also includes 2 shorter stories after Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. One called The Enchantment and one called You'll Find That It's Like That All Over. Both great. I really enjoyed reading Things Have Gotten Worse again. I think that's really a fantastic queer-centric horror story about these 2 women who get into a relationship in the 90s over the internet. So the format is kind of fun. It's a lot of like instant messaging, emails, stuff like that, and they get into a relationship that does not end well for either of them. And it's just really a great story, great characters. It's one that is just gonna sit in your mind, I think. At least it has for me. And it was great to read over. So check that out, check my review out. I'll leave a clicker or a link. I'll try to remember to do that so you can watch my full review. Next, I would like to tell you about Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This I listened to on audio, but I like to have a physical copy of the books that I enjoy, even on audio. So this I rented from my library, but then I was able to find a used copy. This is a sci-fi book that came out in 2011, and it is the start to the Expanse series. This is about a little ship crew. They're miners. I think they mine ice on Saturn. And they're coming back from an expedition, and their crew also has like another ship that, if I'm remembering correctly, because this book is chock full of lots of shit, right? In a good way. If I'm remembering correctly, their other ship is more like where like the crew stays while they're doing shit, you know what I mean? So it was a larger population on that ship, and people who are their friends, and they spend a lot of time with these people because they're with them for long periods of time. And as they're traveling back to the asteroid belts, their ship is attacked and blown up. I can't remember what the ship is called, but the captain, his name is Holden, and he's obviously devastated by this, and he thinks he sees the ship that has done this, and he believes it's a ship from the Mars colony. In this world, there are different colonies. There are people who grew up on Earth, people, I think, from the moon, there's people from Mars, and also people from the asteroid belt. And while they seem to work well together, there's definitely some rivalries and some stereotypes, just as humans love to do, right? So this starts kind of like a interplanetary civil war kind of a thing, and you're not really sure what's exactly going on or like why this could have happened. And there's like a lot of political scheming. There is another character that we follow closely named Miller, who's a detective, and he is looking for a woman named Juliet Mao, who has disappeared. And so there are some different like subplot lines, but they all come together in the end, and it was really a great novel. The audiobook was great. I think at first it's a little bit hard to follow because they just kind of throw you in there with all this stuff, and I'm not a really experienced sci-fi reader, especially when it comes to like space opera books that are, I don't think this is like super hard sci-fi, but they are people who live in outer space, you know what I mean? So that's not something I'm super familiar with, but I think that this is fairly accessible. Like, it was a little bit confusing at first, but it did not take me very long at all to get in the groove of things and be able to follow along with what's happening with the story. I don't think there's anything that I was very confused about. I think that the author, I believe that this is two authors under the same pen name. So James S.A. Corey, I think two people, and they did a really great job fleshing things out, explaining the ins and outs of these ships and these settlements in a way that didn't confuse me, as a not very not usual sci-fi. What am I trying to say? I don't read sci-fi that much, like I said, so I think this was fairly accessible for a huge giant sci-fi book, you know what I mean? So if you're not really into sci-fi but would like to be, I think that why not start with this? There is this kind of biological bioengineering weapon type of thing that they get into, which is really interesting, and I thought this was a really great book. So if you didn't notice, I went on for quite some time about it, so it was pretty good. Next, I read The Toll by Cherie Priest, And this is a Southern Gothic horror book that came out in 2019. This was fairly good. I picked this because I thought it would be like a good book, a good horror book that embodies kind of like summery hot weather atmosphere. And I think this did do that well, at least. This is about this couple who are driving to their honeymoon destination in the Okefenokee swamp. They're going on like a canoeing trip, and they cross this series of bridges, but the very last bridge that they cross it looks different than the rest, and it's also just one lane, which is kind of weird. So it definitely stands out. And when they make it across the bridge, the driver, who is the husband of this couple, blacks out, and he wakes up sometime later outside of his car, but near his car, in the middle of the swamp. There's no one around, and his wife is missing. So he makes his way to this tiny town nearby to report this, and it definitely seems like maybe something kind of like this has happened before. We also spend some time with these two little old witchy ladies and their ward, just like this kid who was left on their doorstep basically, and they've decided to raise together. So their little guy, his name is Cameron, and he is growing into an adult, and he's got some ideas about the way his life should be going, and he kind of gets into some mischief, and he seems to be like the only kid in town, which is kind of strange too. But it's a very small town, definitely a place where people grow up and flee from, you know what I mean? So like the locals there are kind of odd and a little bit rough around the edges, you know, just because of where they live and things like that. And this all kind of like comes together. It all revolves around this bridge, and you find out that like the bridge isn't always there. So like, what is going on with this? And it's got some cool like creature featured type of stuff, and like some swampy magic kind of stuff. And it was a good read. I enjoyed it, but I did feel like it was all very surface level, you know what I mean? You don't really get into the background of anybody in this book, which is a little disappointing, especially with these little old ladies who, they just know things that they shouldn't, and are able to do things that they shouldn't be able to, and things like that. So I would have really loved to know more about them, but it was very surface level. So that kind of made it a quicker, more easy read, I guess. You don't need a lot of processing power to take this book on. So it was good, but I don't know, not a favorite. Then finally we get to my first Garbagus pick. This was Crawlspace by Herbert Lieberman, and this was published in 1971. This is a very strange little story. I don't even know what to tell you guys about this. Well, we follow the Graves, Albert and Alice. This is told from Albert's point of view, so that part is very straightforward. And they are retired. They live alone in like a little cottage outside of a little town. And at the very beginning of this book, they meet this young man named Richard who works for, I believe, like the furnace company, and he's like servicing their house, and they start to suspect that maybe Richard is coming back without telling them. And eventually they find out that he's living in this strange crawl space in their basement, and he's like eating critters down there and just like shitting down there, and they don't quite have the reaction that you would expect if you were to find out that someone was shitting and eating wild animals in your crawl space. And I don't know, that is really the plot. Things, I don't know, it's just, this was such a strange book. The Graves, just their reactions to everything Richard does is so strange. I don't want to tell you more than that, because I think this is definitely one that is worth picking up and reading. Like, the experience of going through this with Albert and Alice is very interesting. And I will say, it's not a super fast-paced book, but there are parts that are very tense. I really wish that there is something that happens in the ending that I won't go into, and it's like, it happens off page, which is kind of disappointing because I really would have liked to have been there and seen that. But other than that, I can't complain. I thought that this was so weird and really unlike any other book I've read before. So there's that. This is Crawlspace, and if you can get a copy, I definitely recommend picking this one up. Then I read Fallen Hearts by V.C. Andrews. This is the third book in the Castile family saga. So there's not a whole ton that I can tell you about this, but the main character in this, Heaven, in the very first book, she is living in West Virginia in a shack, like a 2-room shack where they don't have running water. There are a lot of children, and eventually her stepmom abandons them, and her dad's a drunk and he's just like off for long periods of time. And it turns out that like Heaven's mother comes from a very rich family, but her mother died in childbirth, so like she doesn't know how to get in contact with any of these people and things like that. She just has a very terrible childhood, and then she is quickly shifted into like this life of luxury in the second book, which has its own set of problems, you know. But these are very they have some very taboo relationships in them. It's over the top. It is ridiculous. And this one is no different. Heaven makes some strange decisions in this regarding things. I don't know, I shouldn't say, but she's some of the things she does is just so dumb, but I love these books so much, this series especially, and I was glad to reread this. This came out in 1988, and I believe that this is the first book where Andrew Lieberman, her ghostwriter, picked up her work. She had written part of this before her death, and then Lieberman, you know, finished it up for her. And yeah, I don't know, good book. Then I read a book that is coming out August 30th, which technically is tomorrow, so it's in the future for me, but it will be in the past for you. So by the time I get this out and edited, I believe you could definitely pick up your own copy. And let's see, this is like a lighter horror book that I don't know if it is for every audience, because it does follow a woman and like her friends, and it's very much like mom life kind of stuff with a horror twist. This is about a woman, I believe her name is Amy. I don't have a copy to look it up really quick, but I believe her name is Amy, and she has this group of other mom friends, and they all live in the same like kind of affluent neighborhood, and they have like their weekly wine nights where they get together, and they're at their friend. Gosh, that was one of the problems I had with these books, is like everyone's name, and no offense to anyone out there named Jen or Jess or Amy or Liz or Tim or I don't know, Tom. Of course, unless you get your name legally changed, you really don't have any say over what your parents name you. But these names were just so kind of like run-of-the-mill names that I really had a hard time for a lot of the book distinguishing between the characters. But at one point, one of, I think, Amy's friends gets possessed by a demon. And it's one of those books where like no one really believes her at first, which is a trope that I really love. And so she like has to try to convince these people that something's going on, and a lot of people are like, we're gonna give up on this. This is too weird. Your friend's just acting weird. And Amy like just wholeheartedly believes that a demon has possessed her friend, and things get a little bit spooky. There are some like possessed household items, which is fun. And I really liked this. The chapters were super short, so it was super easy to just, you know, you read through this a couple pages and you're like, oh, well, it's the end of the chapter. I can just read one more chapter, and then it's like 20 chapters later. It does not feel like you've read 100 pages, you know what I mean? And the chapters end it just does that. The author did that so well, where it's like a tiny little cliffhanger at the end of each chapter, and you're like, well, you have to keep going, right? It's kind of like, reminds me almost of like a Goosebumps book, but of course, much more adult. And I thought that this was a lot of fun, especially if you're just looking for like a lighter, more lighthearted horror read where the end isn't very bleak. I mean, I just was pleasantly surprised by this. Like I said, probably not for all audiences. These are moms. A lot of this story is like moms doing mom things, and I didn't think that that would appeal to me as much as it did, but I really liked this, and yeah, I would recommend this. So this comes out August 30th. And then we have Dear Sweet Lupe by Jean Thompson. This one was published in 1977, and I did a more in-depth review on that. If you'd like to check that out, I'm gonna make it brief here, but this is kind of a, I don't know, it's like there's a demon maybe, and also this woman gets accused of being a witch, and there's some very strange things happening with this 11-year-old boy, some very inappropriate things. And I don't know what to tell you. Part of this book was really great. Part of this book was really not great. It just was, I don't know, an experience. I wouldn't say don't read this. In fact, I would say there are some really great, like, vintage horror-y parts where it's just over the top and out of line in a great, uncomfortable way. So yeah, that's Lupe. Okay, next book. I actually listened to an audio. This was from the Libro FM ALC program. And this is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. And this is a memoir about her experience growing up, being forced into acting, not knowing that she had an abusive relationship with her mother until her mother died, basically, you know, like for a long time she thought her mother was this kind, caring person. And of course, people are very multi-dimensional, so just because this person is doing this doesn't mean that they also do this. There's like a huge spectrum of human emotion and human behavior, right? So her mom was doing things that were abusive, but also her mom loved her and she loved her mom. And I can't imagine how hard that must be for somebody who was a victim of that, you know what I mean? Somebody who grew up and had to live through that without knowing that that's what it was. Or, you know, even knowing that that's what it is. It's just, yeah, I can't imagine it. So the audio was so excellent. This was read by Jennette. And if you didn't know, maybe I should go into that a little bit. She was a star. She was the co-star of the show iCarly in the early 2000s. She was Sam on that show. Yeah, so there was stuff about maybe some icky things going on at Nickelodeon, and, you know, her mom forcing her into this career that she did not want to have, but then feeling like that's all she has because she was forced into doing this. So she didn't have the same opportunities as other people, you know, going to college and getting a high school education and things like that. So it was a really sad book, but it is hopeful, and I'm glad that I read it, and I really hope that Jennette continues on and, you know, is able to achieve her dreams of becoming an author. You know, I mean, I guess technically she is an author, but it seems like she wants to continue doing that, and I hope that she does. So this was great, especially on audio. I always have a link to my Libro FM thing down below if you would like to check that out and everything. The audio is especially good, and I love the cover. It is like startling. I mean, the title is startling, the cover is startling in such like a Sweet Valley Highway. I don't know, it's so strange, but great book. All right, I also read this month American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis. This came out in 1991. So I guess, like, technically I could include this in my Garb August read. This is a strange book, and this is a very graphic book. I was not prepared for how graphic this is sexually. I mean, there's a lot of like sexual violence in this. There's violence towards animals in this. This book kind of makes you feel like you're going crazy as you're reading this, because Patrick Bateman, he's just, in this way, if you've seen the movie, it's a lot like how he is in the movie, where he just off the cuff knows the brands of these things, like these clothing items, and this information about music artists that he likes and objects that he likes, you know, like his Walkman and his record player and his stereo and just things like that. Just this very insanely detailed stuff. And he is somebody who kills people. He mostly targets people who are in vulnerable situations, people who are homeless, people who live on the streets, people who are sex workers, you know, stuff like that. So animals, you know, very vulnerable parts of our earth, life forms on our earth, and he is a despicable human being. This book is so graphic. There was one part, I was trying to finish this one night because I only had like 100 pages left. I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna bang this out real quick. And I was reading while I was eating dinner, and I had to put this down. I was like, I cannot eat and read this at the same time. This is terrible. I am not somebody who looks for extreme horror in books, so I think, at least as far in my reading experience, my reading life, I think this is the most fucked up book I've read so far, as far as like violence and sexual violence goes. I think this competes with Tampa, which is a book about a pedophilic teacher. So like, I don't know. This is definitely not for everybody. Like I said, there is just a multitude of content warnings that has to come with this book. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in this, but you have certain things that could cause you mental anguish, definitely look on the list of that shit, because like, I think just reading this book will cause you mental anguish. I feel like I'm having like a flashback. It's just a tough book, but I liked it. So there's American Psycho. I don't know what to tell you more than that. All right, and my very last book, Fairest Flesh by K.P. Kulski. This came out in 2020, and this is a book I chose for a upcoming trope video in October, where I'm going to be talking about historical horror. So that's what this book is about. It's about Countess Erzsébet Bathory. She was, you know, the Hungarian countess who, it was rumored that she bathed in the blood of the surrounding young village girls, and who knows if that's true. I feel like this might be a little bit like a Vlad the Impaler thing, where they didn't like this person, and so they made up crazy rumors about them, you know what I mean, to kind of make them seem like horrible monsters when they weren't. But also, I've not done any research on this person. It's just like, could a person really be so evil? I don't know. I guess you'll have to read this and find out. Not that this is this is a fictional account of it, of course, but I will get more into it when I do my trope video. But I did like this. I did like this. This was a good book. All right, well, that's what I read in August. 10 books. Here we go. Bam, bam, bam. 3 of them I didn't even really talk about, and still this video is very long. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope August was a good month for you. I'd love to know what you read, if you've read any of these, and also what you read yourself, if there were any standout books for you this month. I'd love to hear about it. Again, thank you so much for watching, you guys, and I will see you later. Goodbye!